to Straight Up 30, where we make policy make sense in 30 minutes or less. I'm your host, Ross Izard, and today we are here to talk about something that is near and dear to my heart, which is conservation and environmental policy. So you may not know this, but I have a severe mental illness called fly fishing. And so I spend every second that I can when I'm not doing politics, which unfortunately is less and less of my life these days, outside, hiking, backpacking, fly fishing, being in the water. And you really can't do that and work in politics without developing a serious passion for environmental policy. There are a lot of folks doing that work, but one of the biggest, I would say maybe the biggest household name in environmental policy is the Sierra Club. They have a Colorado chapter called Sierra Club Colorado, and Garrett Royer, our guest today, is the political director over there. So Garrett, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Glad to be here.
So you've been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, I have. I've been at Colorado Sierra Club for 2 years now in the role of doing politics, representing them at the legislature, and also doing election work. But before that, I worked in LGBTQ politics for a long time. I was at One Colorado, so very heavily involved in the state legislature. I basically was every position that you could be at that organization because I was there for 8 years. And then before that, I worked for, got to get this right. I worked for Mayor Hancock on his reelection campaign. I worked for Governor Hickenlooper on his reelection campaign. And then I got my start actually working for Obama's reelection campaign in 2012. And that was kind of what got me into, you can make a career out of this.
If you make the wrong choices instead of
exactly,
something different, right?
Exactly.
So Garrett's
if you like pulling your hair out.
That's right. I mean, and Garrett's an interesting guy because usually when you've done politics for a long time, I mean, your hair falls out, right? You get kind of a little bit cynical. You don't smile as much.
Oh, yeah,
yeah. I appreciate that you bring sort of a pizzazz to it.
Oh, appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, okay, let's talk a little bit about Sierra Club. I mean, you work all over the country, but you're specifically in charge of their political work here in Colorado,
Right?
Which is pretty far-reaching, right? So, talk to us a little bit about sort of how the organization's structured and how you work here in Colorado.
Yeah. Sierra Club is a really fascinating organization just from a nonprofit position because it was founded by John Muir in the 1800s. The idea behind it was around conservation protections. So it was really an organization that initially was about protecting public lands and protecting national parks. And so much of it was volunteer led in part because of that mission. So volunteers were kind of the main ones running the program. And it wasn't until like the late 1960s, 1970s that staff really had a much bigger role within the organization. So even now, it is so much a shared co-leadership between me as a staff person and then all the volunteers that I work with, which is great because, I can't be at the Capitol all the time. I can't be talking to folks all the time. So we've got a bunch of really well-trained, awesome policy expert volunteers that can go testify at the Capitol and do various things. It does create an interesting dynamic within the organization because you've got volunteers that, might not always say what you want them to say, but they're bringing their passion, and that's why they are volunteering for this organization. So it's a cool gig to be able to do because I work with all of these people that are, just wanting to be involved. They're there because they want to, not because they're getting paid. And they really have a say in what the organization is prioritizing. And there's so many people that, like one of our best volunteers, he was a neurosurgeon in his professional life. And then he retired and he was like, you know what? I love oil and gas policy. I'm going to become an expert in this now. And now legislators know him by name because he is such a respected, spokesperson and expert at the Capitol. So it's a really cool organization to get to work for that way. And I just get to represent those people,
Yeah, I mean, that's a big deal, right? And one of the reasons that I love environmental policy is because it has this really unique ability to take people from every walk of life, right? Like it cuts across racial boundaries, economic boundaries, professional boundaries. Everybody gets passionate about the outdoors. And they might be passionate about this thing or that thing, but it sort of brings these communities of people together. And in my experience, like when we're working on let's say an education issue or a housing issue or whatever, finding volunteers who are going to go spend their time to do that is hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard work. So the fact that you've built a political effort around that is actually really important. And I think a testament to how important the work is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very much. I mean, I would say what we need to continue doing and building the work of that organization forward is bring in more diverse backgrounds, groups of folks. A lot of folks that have the ability to volunteer to that capacity, they're retired, and a lot of them are older, white retired people. So it's really what I'm trying to do in my role is bring in younger folks, folks from different economic backgrounds, queer people, because of my background working in queer politics for so long. That is really important to me, so that there are a bunch of different voices in making those decisions. But it's cool to be able to work with so many experts, and I just think we can do more to bring in diverse voices.
Yeah, and I would imagine as Colorado grows and it gets more diverse just in general, you're going to have more and more people finding their way outside and connecting with it, and then they're going to get excited about it. So that's awesome. You're on the front end.
I mean, I think that's why people find a passion for doing environmental work, because of, so many people know how great it is to live in the state of Colorado, right? I mean, I left to do environmental stuff because I cared so much about hiking and skiing and being in the outdoors. And I think you are really aware of where we're at when it comes to climate change right now, being in Colorado, because it should not be 70 degrees in February. And every time you go up to ski, it feels like the end of spring, So
I heard climate change isn't real. That's I don't know what you've heard, but as I was walking in here, like in a t-shirt, it's probably not supposed to be exactly this way.
Right.
All right, so let me ask you this, because environmental policy is sort of a big thing, right? Like that's a big, hairy, woolly mammoth, and it can mean everything from water policy to land use policy to conservation policy. I mean, there's a million ways that can be chunked out. You're managing this organization that is specific to Colorado but has a national chapter. You have all these volunteers who are at the Capitol working on this stuff. Talk to me a little bit about the legislative issues that you're tracking this year.
Yeah, so there's some really big issues right now in the state. We've been seeing this all over the country too, but Colorado, I think, is a focal point of the construction of data centers. And data centers are primarily used for AI, for powering more complex algorithms that companies are relying on. And we need to continue to utilize data centers the more that AI has grown. So Xcel Energy actually said that within the next, I think it's by 2035, they anticipate that just because of the growth of data centers in the state of Colorado, our energy demand is going to be increased by 30%, which is a huge amount. And we don't really have good plans for what that is going to look like. Because as you construct these data centers, you are dealing with what are the chemicals that they are releasing into the air? What is the air quality like after they're constructed? And then what is the toll that they are using on the grid? And who's paying for them? That is another really big issue. So what we're seeing at the Capitol right now is there's one bill that has been introduced, which is House Bill 1030, which would offer really big tax breaks to some of these corporations like Palantir, Google, all of your favorite tech companies are trying to come into Colorado and build these data centers. And I think where we're at as the environmental community is data centers are going to be constructed in Colorado, but we need them to do so in a way that is responsible, has appropriate guardrails, that is acknowledging what is going on in communities. So there's a separate bill that was just introduced, which I think is Senate Bill 107, which would have more of these protections in place. So it would ensure that data centers are powered using clean energy, that proper permitting is a huge component, and that there's not massive tax breaks for tech companies. And I think that's really important, that we have to acknowledge data centers aren't going away. AI is going to continue to grow, but we need to make sure that communities aren't being hurt when these massive projects are being built in our state.
Yeah, and this is kind of a classic example of technology outpacing politics, right? So one of the interesting things about data centers is that, I mean, as Garrett mentioned, obviously it's a huge load on the grid. There are environmental footprint issues all over the place, but then also there's a water usage issue. And a lot of people don't know, like if you pull out ChatGPT and you just type in, how do I make green bean casserole? Cool. Now you know how to make green bean casserole, but you probably I actually read, this is wild. You use like 500 milliliters of water to cool those computers just
Right.
to ask that single question. Don't
Mm-hmm.
quote me on the stat, but it's some level of water that's being used for it. And as AI has sort of exploded across the country, it's been encouraged by the federal government, who really wants to see it expand. But the policy infrastructure underneath it, so the permitting processes, the setup processes, the way this stuff is governed and regulated, really hasn't caught up. And so you have this sort of crazy patchwork where, to your point, they're being built,
Mm-hmm.
right? But they're largely being built in a universe where they're being decided on by local
Right.
governments that don't have a framework to make these decisions.
Mm-hmm.
And then the feds are saying this is good. And now you have the states coming along behind them and trying to figure out how the heck to make this thing work. And that's how you get to these two dueling bills, which for anybody who doesn't follow the legislature, this is an interesting thing to work on. You've
Right.
got a bill on the House side that's
Mm-hmm.
doing pro-corporate, pro-data center stuff. Then a bill on the other side in the Senate that's really more about protections. And those bills are going to run into each other
Yeah.
and generate a pretty big policy conversation, right?
Correct. Yeah. And there's a lot of internal dynamics that are happening because of those bills being introduced and run both by Democrats as well. The House Bill 1030 is a bipartisan bill, but is being sponsored by Democrats, which I think if you're on the more progressive side, you would ask, well, why is this legislation being run by folks that, supposedly want to make sure that there are protections for communities and don't want to give massive handouts to corporations? But I think you'd have to go look into campaign donations potentially to learn more about that.
That was a subtle hint. I liked it. Yeah.
That all is to say, I mean, I think you bring up a really good point about you have this massive issue of the water usage that data centers require. A lot of that water, then once it's used to cool the data centers, it needs to be filtered. It needs to be cleaned because you get all these chemicals that go through the data centers to cool them down. Colorado, also interestingly, because of the elevation that we're at, you have to use, I believe it's water that is below a certain temperature. I can't remember exactly what temperature, but that's to do with the elevation. So that is also more of a toll that you are using. And what's happening now is that because there aren't really any guardrails, there's not protections, these companies are throwing up data centers in really vulnerable communities. So the Elyria Swansea area, North Denver, very, very economically challenged part of the city, and very diverse part of the city. And there's a massive data center that is being thrown up right now. And people just don't really have the ability to push back or offer any critique on that being thrown up. So you see that too all over Colorado, that it's a lot of these more low income communities where they are putting these data centers in place, which just has more of a negative impact on the folks that are living there,
And it's happening in real time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so it's there are other issues where you're fighting over, like whether to build a Walmart,
Sure.
right? Or whether to build a wind farm or whatever it happens to be. And the thing doesn't exist yet.
Mm-hmm.
AI is here. Like we're
Yeah.
building the data centers now. And to your point, these communities are, for whatever reason, just not really equipped to make decisions about how complicated of an issue
Right.
this might be until we have a serious policy debate down at the State House, which involves this crazy confluence of corporate interest and environmental interest and local governments and
Mm-hmm.
average citizens and water people and sportsmen and everybody else. And we don't know how it's going to play out yet, right? I mean, it's February,
Yeah.
whatever,
Yeah.
and we've got some time left, but it's going to be messy.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah. And I mean, our role, I think, as the Sierra Club is to make sure that folks who are living in those communities, who are going to be affected, and who are using AI right now, but want to do so in a way where we're encouraging that it is not allowing rampant construction of data centers all across the state. Those folks' voices are heard. So that's what we're trying to do. That's what I think our role is as an advocacy organization, to bring people to the Capitol, make sure that they are airing their concerns about one of these bad bills, and then hopefully encouraging the one that I would like to pass, which is the bill that's originating in the Senate.
Okay, so you won't be bored.
Right, exactly.
So what else do you have going on? 'Cause
yeah.
I know that's not the only thing.
No, I'm glad you asked too. So there's a whole other issue that's happening right now around coal in Colorado. And coal's interesting because I think A lot of folks think that it's something that we sort of move past, or coal is really only still a major source of energy in places like West Virginia or Appalachia. But we do still have major coal plants in Colorado. And a lot of those coal plants had been scheduled to retire or are scheduled to retire by the end of this decade. But because of interference from the federal government right now, one of the coal plants that was scheduled to retire, which is the Craig coal plant, it's up near Steamboat, it was scheduled to retire the end of 2025, and the Trump administration used what's called a 202C order. These are orders that it's a very interesting use of this power, but it comes through the War Powers Act, and it allows the federal government to say, we don't have enough resources. We need to ensure that industry is producing at a higher level. So it allows them to bypass state scheduled deadlines for retirements of coal plants and bypass those orders and allow the coal plants to continue operating. So we're seeing that while at the same time, because Colorado has this really growing renewable industry, we're using power in much different ways in Colorado, and coal is not our primary source of energy. It's gas and solar in Colorado. There's not really a reason why we need to continue the use of these coal plants beyond their date of scheduled retirement and continue to use what is the dirtiest fossil fuel available to us and will become one of the most expensive if we continue to use it long term, because we're essentially propping up these coal companies through these federal orders, and then those costs get passed on to you and me through our utility bills. So it's actually making things more expensive. And what we are trying to do at the state capitol is pass a bill that would actually put a cap on emissions of any of these coal plants if they're operating beyond their retirement dates. So they would have to report how much energy they're generating. They'd have to report to the Public Utilities Commission about how much is this actually costing folks. What is this costing us? So that's what we're trying to do, is just add some transparency behind this, because I don't think many people are probably paying attention to what's going on with coal, but it's something that we are moving away from as a nation, not just as a state. And the Trump administration is making a very intentional choice to keep up an industry that, instead of trying to, get these people into other jobs that work for coal industries, they're trying to prop up an industry that we are then going to pay for at the end of the day. So that is my coal tangent.
Well, so let me ask you this, because that's an interesting thing, right? If you worked on Obama's campaign, you said. So, back in those days, emissions caps were a thing, right? We've carbon trading and emissions caps and all that stuff. And it was, I remember watching some knockdown, drag out fights over these issues, but I don't recall there ever really being a conversation about transparency, right? And in fact, that was one of the deciding factors in a lot of the conversations that I was involved in, was that nobody knew what the hell was going on, right? We were kind of using made up numbers and made up math and then having fights over the economics of whether or not these caps are going to work. There wasn't a lot of serious conversation about quantifying the emissions, and then, to your point, quantifying the cost to the consumer, which in the end is really the most important thing. We've got the environmental aspect, which is huge, but with the average voter, which, let's be real, that's what these folks care about. Yeah. What they care about is what this does to the grid and the availability of affordable energy. And so coal is kind of you have the data centers, which are technology outpacing policy. And then you have coal, which is basically old school stuff lagging behind policy. And you guys are trying to do both of those at the same time, which I imagine is challenging.
That's I really like the way you put that. No, you're absolutely right. It's dealing with, I think, this tech of the future that nobody has really quite figured out yet, and then this energy source of the past that it does really seem like, if you talk with people that worked for the Sierra Club at the national level 7, 8, 10 years ago, they're like, why are we're doing coal again? Coal's still a thing. And I don't say that to be flippant about the people that they're livelihood is on coal. But what I think we should be doing instead is creating opportunities where there are job transition workforce development programs, and make sure that those folks are taken care of and have other industries to go into while we retire coal in the very sensible deadlines that already exist, rather than keeping this source going that is just going to cost all of us way more in the long run.
Okay, so let me ask you this. You're
Yep.
living in the legislative realm where
Mhm.
the legislature is, they're throwing eggs and tomatoes at each other and they're doing their thing. And,
Right.
that gets progressively worse until May. And then sine die happens and maybe it all gets solved. Probably it doesn't. But outside of that, it's an election year, right? Sierra Club does more than just legislative work. You're also working on political stuff, which means elections. You've already touched on this a little bit, and I don't expect you to throw everything on the table, but I think it's worth talking about the connection between your elections and political work and the legislative work that you're doing, because they are really intimately connected, especially on these issues that affect so many people.
Oh yeah, yeah. I think it's really important that we're paying attention to this year's election, especially. I mean, everybody says every election is the most important election, but I do think this is going to have a big impact on what Colorado looks like at the legislative level and at the governor's race level. We have a huge governor's race where our two-term governor is term limited, and we've got two folks that are running for the Democratic primary that are kind of similar in a lot of ways, Attorney General Weiser and Senator Bennett. And then you also have all of the other statewide races that are open. So you've got treasurer and you've got the Secretary of State. So there's a lot of influence and opportunity to get involved in those. And then what we do too at the Sierra Club is we do a lot of endorsements in state legislative races. And I think what's interesting for progressive organizations now in Colorado, you kind of talk to folks and they're like, well, the real race is not the general election as much anymore when it comes to the legislature. It's the primaries, which creates some really, really interesting dynamics where we'll have folks that are not necessarily the most pro-environmental running in a primary, in a Democratic primary, and we'll have to pick between those folks when a few years ago that wasn't really the case. But you do have a lot more kind of industry-backed candidates that are running in Democratic primaries that are making some of these laws that are allowing tech companies to come in and rake in as much as they can to build a data center. So that's why I think the elections are so important that we get involved in. So our process right now as the Sierra Club is kind of to evaluate who's going to be the best on these issues, from how communities are impacted, where they stand on data centers, what they think kind of the future of environmentalism looks like in Colorado. And then also when it comes to the governor's race, how are they going to push back on some of these things that the federal administration is doing? The Trump administration has straight up said, we would like to sell off Colorado's public lands and give them to oil and gas companies. So our role, I think, as endorsing folks in the governor's race is how do we make sure that we are really pushing them to protect what every Coloradan really has appreciated about living in the state of Colorado. That's our public lands in a lot of ways. So that's some of how we're thinking about these races. And I'm not going to go into who I'm like rooting for necessarily in the governor's race. But I think we've got a closer race than people would appreciate. I'm surprising myself by saying that because I wouldn't have thought that, even a few months ago.
On the primary side.
Yeah, on the primary side.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to think about the fact that you're right. I mean, in a lot of cases, and governor's race is obviously a different animal, but there has been a shift to primary warfare as opposed to general warfare because
100%.
a lot of these districts just aren't very competitive, to be honest with you. So there may be a Republican in a Democratic district, but it's not worth engaging in, or vice versa.
Right.
And so you've got folks that are in the same party, in the same caucus, talking to the same voters about the same issues, but taking different positions. And then your job is to sit down with those folks, I presume, talk to them, interview them, maybe educate them a little bit if you're lucky, and then make sort of a guess about whether they're going to be the people running this bill or that bill next session.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a lot of work.
Yeah, it's It's time consuming, but this is why we have so many amazing volunteers that are involved in the Sierra Club as well, and how that allows us to be pretty quick but informed in the work that we're doing. It's not me, obviously, it's a whole political committee that are all volunteers that are assessing a lot of these decisions of who's going to really represent the best interests, not just for the Sierra Club of Colorado, but the environmental community and kind of progressive decision makers at large. I think that's really how I'm able to do my job, is by working with so many of these awesome volunteers and delegate my needs and skill set, onto those folks.
Delegate.
Everybody
loves delegation. All right. Let's say that I wanted to become a volunteer or otherwise support what Sierra Club is doing, or maybe just learn more.
Mm-hmm.
Where do I go? How do I do that?
Yeah. SierraClubColorado.org is where our website is. And I would love to talk with folks about how they want to get involved. There's a lot of different ways that people can get involved with us. We're actually doing a lobby day at the state capitol on March 9th. So that's going to be an opportunity where we are talking about all of these bills, as well as other ones that are coming up. There's huge interest of Sierra Club is wildlife, and there are different wildlife bills that are happening this legislative session but hadn't gotten into yet, but we'll be talking about all of those at our lobby day as well on the 9th, so that would be a really good point of entry, I would say. But the other thing that I will just encourage is, I think a lot of people, when they think about politics, when they think about elected officials at the state capitol, they just think that is so inaccessible to them. And I mean, I'm sure you feel this. In my experience of working with electeds, they are just people, and they will just have a conversation with you. And I think we need to demystify a little bit what it means when somebody is an elected official, and that at the end of the day, they are there to serve all of us. And you should feel empowered to go talk to them.
And they need help. I mean, let's be real. With love to all of our elected friends, they need some help understanding these issues, because they've got 700 bills to deal with down there. A lot of them are new. I mean, a huge percentage of them are actually not even elected. They're just there by vacancy committee. So they're kind of figuring this thing out.
That's a whole other issue, right?
Totally. And we don't have time to do that one. We'll do that separately, but they need to hear from you. They want to hear from you. It is their job to listen to you. And so if you want to get involved through Sierra Club or anyone else, there's never been a better time to do it. So I hope you take the time to look them up. Garrett, I wish you the best of luck sorting all this out, and we'll look forward to a rundown of where it all landed. Thanks for being with us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
That'll do it for this episode of the Straight Up 30. We'll be back next week with another policy issue that you care about. Until then, take care. We'll see you soon.